Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Best Books Ever. I'm Tyler, and today we have finally reached the end on this chapter, this entire book, Cirque du Freak, Sons of Destiny, final book. Um, Man, this was a journey. Like I said, obviously, quantity of books. This is book 12, so we've been through a lot of that. But I think this reached an ending that was pretty crazy. I don't think anyone could have seen this coming, and a lot to talk about. A lot of emotional things happening, and very interesting because I feel like this makes, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a controversial ending because I feel like this ends in a way where it's like, oh, it was all a dream. But I think, especially reading it this time, like, reading it another time, I think it is a little more than that. It is a little more than, oh well, nothing mattered. There's a little bit more nuance to it, so let's talk about it. Let's see. So let's get to the very end, right? What happens? So there's a lot to, actually, I don't know where I want to start because I feel like everything's connected. um let's do something different. Let's start at the beginning, get some of the earlier stuff out the way because the ending is so involved that you kind of have to talk about the entire like second half, or even more than the second half. Like the final like 2/3 of this book are all like one stretch almost. So let's get some of the beginning stuff out the way. Um, a lot of the beginning stuff has to do with Darius, which was a fun addition to the story. Um, we learned that Darius is going to become Vampanese, which was very scary, right? He's been blooded, and so that's a whole thing, right? With him being Darren's nephew, um, that is a heartbreak because the plan was like, okay, just go home, forget about it. Maybe this will all be a dream to you, somebody, but you can't because if you're a Vampanese, you're gonna eventually want to drink blood, and if you're a Vampanese more than a vampire, which he is, it's gonna lead to you killing. Like it's gonna be insatiable. Um, Tough break, right? Because even if he was a vampire, it's like, maybe I could take you under my wing, or at least other vampires could help you out. Which would, could still happen. But Vampanese is tough. Vampanese is tough. It's tough to learn that. Which leads to him going to Annie, which is one of my favorite moments of the entire series. As I was reading this, I was like, man, the book could just end here. I don't need to know what happens in the War of Scars. I don't need to know who becomes the Lord of Shadows, who lives, who dies, all that stuff. Mr. Tiny, Ivana, none of that. The book could end right here because him going to Annie, Annie being like, "Oh my God, it's Darren," then Annie being like, "I don't care if you're Darren, you're not Darren, you're not my brother. Like something happened. I can't have this. I can't deal with this. You're crazy." And then Darius being like, "Hey, it's Steve. Steve's the Lord of Shadows. Steve's the one who did this," and then that sort of is the final straw that she needs to click everything together and just kind of accept that this is happening. Like too many pieces, right? There's too many pieces here for you to ignore all of them. Um, and then we get to the more quote unquote nice conversations they get to have where he's more regaling her of some stories, some highlights of his life these past decade or 2 decades, whatever, how long it's been. Her telling him of some of the amazing things that she's been able to do in her life. um, it is overall very bittersweet though because while there's the highlights, there are the lowlights as well. And learning about Annie, learning about Steve, like I said it last time where I was like, Steve is diabolical, and that's an understatement. Like even Darren was thinking about it, and he's like, yeah, there is no way with the amount of prep and planning and just like how meticulous Steve is with everything, that he's seen firsthand. Steve planned this. Steve went to Annie, made her fall in love with him, and made her have a kid. And then we learned that like he just showed up one time in the middle of the night, like woke her up, put his hand over her mouth, and was like, "There's no getting out of this now," and then left. And it's like, what evil, like you are such an evil man. And then that like crush Annie, and the whole thing is over. A relationship, the person that she thought she loved, gone, stuck with a kid. Obviously she loves Darius, right? um but like there was a moment there where I was like, oh, maybe he's not the father, because in the very beginning when she started talking about Steve, it was like, oh, maybe he's not the dad, maybe. And then no, he was. And it's like, ah, it's just so like, I don't know, not really jumping ahead, but even going to what Ivana said eventually, where she's like, Steve deserves the Lake of Souls. He deserves to be there. I do pity him, but he chose the path that he went down. Like there was some influencing from Mr. Tiny, but the majority of what he actually did, the evil acts that he actually committed, was him. And that's just insane, because again, it wasn't like confirmed, and we obviously also didn't know the details last book. But even last book, it was like him getting Annie pregnant is super evil, super diabolical, super like just scum of a human. And then for us to have it confirmed here and then have to relive it through Annie actually saying, here's what happened and here's what I had to go through. Oh man, just couldn't wait for him to die. So um and then that leads to Darren blooding Darius, because he's like, hey, there's only one way to get out of him being Vampanese. I try to blood him. My vampire cells can hopefully overtake his Vampanese cells. Hopefully both of us live. It does happen. It was scary there for a moment, but he is successful in it. So at least in that future, Darius unfortunately has to deal with the drawbacks of eventually becoming a vampire. A lot of obviously what Darren had to go through, but he is saved from having to be Vampanese and having to kill. Um, and there are ways that he'll be able to live with that. That Annie will be able to help. And she's been very understanding up until this point. It's going to be hard for her, but honestly, probably not harder than what she's already had to go through, which is crazy to say. And like I said, Darren was like, hey, there's people that'll help. Like I know I'm a prince. Like there are people that will help. Darius get accustomed to his life. Um, so there's that, which is cool. And that kind of closes the chapter on the Annie stuff. I really like the Annie stuff because that's his sister. You know what I mean? Like we don't ever see the parents again, but him going back and him being very lucky that people around him are so understanding and they do just kind of accept, kind of right off the bat, they do, or maybe forced to accept that all this is real. I mean, even we go back to Debbie, right? Where, um, Darren told Debbie and Debbie didn't believe it. Like we learned that the next day where she was like, I was ready to call you crazy, but then I saw this stuff on the news and like with all this, and it's like, oh man, maybe this is true. And so now with Annie, like she has to accept it. Like he knows too much. I think that's something we were thinking about last book too. Of like, there's most likely he would be able to convince her, but it was nice that he didn't just go up to her and was like, hey, I'm your brother. Now with Darius in the picture, he kind of had to, but it's just so sad because it's like, man, Annie was cool. The little bit that we saw her in book one, um, and for her to have to grow up like that, like losing a brother, um, that being so hard on her, like the parents obviously having a hard time, and then her maybe falling in love with someone only for that someone to get her pregnant and then rip her heart out, because now we understand that was all a scheme. It was all a scheme by him. Um, just awful. So I like that they were able to get those last moments together before everything happened. Because in another timeline, I'm sure they would have been very, very close siblings throughout their whole life. So Speaking of people that are close to him and understanding, I really like the moment a little later on where we learn that the entire Cirque du Freak is with Darren. Like, we have the moment where, I forgot her name. It's like Merla. Is that who I'm thinking of? The wife to Evra, the one who can throw her ears. Her attacking him for like, blaming Shankus's death on him, and then being like, "No, we're cool. We're all with you. We're waiting for you to give the signal. Like, we will attack. We don't blame you. I don't blame you for Shankus's death. Like, you tell us, and we will kill these fools. we will destroy Steve and everyone who stands with him." And then him kind of breaking down in that moment and being like, "Oh, it's my fault if I wasn't there, if I could have prevented it, because he does blame himself just in general, but then more specifically the moments where he decided to let Vancha let them continue to take Shankus, because they were like, "Hey, if Shankus can, if we let them go, they could lead us right to Steve, boom, boom, boom. So then maybe if he changed that moment and said, no, kill him right there, let's take Shankus, forget Steve, maybe he'd still be alive." But, I really like that moment, obviously her specifically still being in, Evra, them not blaming Darren, but then the entire Cirque being like, "We're here to back you up," was really good. I mean, even for him, he thought it in his mind too of like, that did something to me. Like, that gave me hope to know that I have people behind me, like the people that I see as basically my other family aside from the vampires and my human family, which I don't have too many ties to at this point. Um, to be with me and to be ready and to be like motivated. I love seeing a Hardcat too. Hardcat just like fuming in anger, just like the second the moment I get an opportunity, I'm going to slaughter everybody. I'm gonna get Steve. I don't even care about the prophecy. I'm going to destroy Steve as soon as I get him. Um, I feel like as the reader, not just Darren in the story, but as the reader, that sort of amps you up too. Um, so I very much like that. And then we pretty much get the beginning of the end right here. Darren kills Steve, which is something very gratifying, very, very, very gratifying, because, like I've said for so long, Steve needs to die. He needs to die. I don't want to go over everything in super detail because I've already said it a million times, but just his whole way of thinking, his delusion, his revenge, like hell bent on revenge. It just needs to end, and all the terrible things he's done, like not every book, 'cause we don't see him every book, but every time we see him in some capacity, he just adds another reason as to why he is evil. He's not the antagonist of the story. He's not the villain of the story. He's pure evil, and he has let it consume him, which is something that obviously Darren was very afraid of for himself, because the possibility that he becomes the Lord of Shadows, it's like, wait, I'm gonna be like that? No way. Even Steve killing Shankus and then looking to Darren and be like, "Go ahead. I killed Shankus. Now you kill Darius, because then you will be dragged down to my level." He wanted it more than anything. Um, which is why I love the moment, obviously before this, when Darren is like, "He's not your boy. He doesn't believe you anymore. He thinks you're evil." And Steve is like, "Yeah, whatever. I never had, I was never close to that anyway. He's weak. He's whatever." And then Darren dropping the bomb that he's not a Vampinese anymore. He's a vampire. I blooded him. And Steve getting angry at that and being like, "You shouldn't have done that. He's my boy. You had no right to do that." And Darren is like, "He's not yours anymore. He's mine." And like that little win, because it seems like for the most part, Steve was always one step ahead, normally 2 or 3 steps ahead of Darren. And so for Darren to get that little victory, to take his son away from him, which on paper is crazy, but if you look at the situation surrounding it, Steve never cared about him. using him the whole time before he was even concepted. He was planning to use him against Darren. We know that, again, Steve never admitted it, but we know this. We know the whole reason why he went to Annie is because of his revenge plot. That's the whole reason. You never wanted a child. So that was great. So yeah, rounding back, Darren killing Steve was awesome. I am very happy that he did that because he doesn't deserve to live. Like using war as an excuse works in many cases, but there's a lot of evil stuff that he did that was not necessary. Again, him killing Shankus is crazy, absolutely not necessary. Um, but that just hits a domino effect because there's so many other things that we learn in that moment. The fact that Mr. Tiny has influenced many, many people's lives, specifically surrounding Darren and Steve. He says that like he's the one who made it so Darren was able to catch the Cirque du Freak ticket back in book one. Remember when they only had 2 tickets and they were like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to throw them in the air, and whoever catches the other ticket gets to go to the Cirque. And Darren heard like a voice or something and like went to close his hands or something. He's the one who whispered whispers into Steve's ear after the moment that Steve gets rejected by Crepsley, and he's like, "Oh, because he's evil, you should go after him. Darren is plotting against you." Like that sort of stuff that puts Steve even further down the path of evil and revenge. So we already kind of knew that Tiny likes to pull strings, but the fact that he basically orchestrated all of the events in this series just makes you hate him even more than you already did. And then, if that wasn't enough, we learned that Steve and Darren are his children. He had sons, which kind of borders the line of against the rules of the universe. But I guess he just inside of what he is allowed to do. But now they're his sons, so that's why they have certain power, certain influence. That's why even more so he had a he was invested in their stories, and that's also just why they exist. I mean, not literally why they exist, but he couldn't have kids in the traditional way, so he finally decided, let me have some kids, let me pit them against each other, let me that's why he's like to Darren, he's like, ruin your lives. One of you became the youngest vampire prince ever, with influence, and you had all these friends, and and then one of you became a prince, one of you became a lord. What do you mean I ruined your lives? But to him that makes perfect sense, but to Darren and even Steve to an extent, I'm sure, is like the horrors we had to endure, the loved ones that we have had to see die, the loved ones that we have had to kill on the other end. It's like, what do you mean? So pretty crazy, and that's why we know the name of the book, Sons of Destiny. Now we understand why. But yeah, it's just crazy that like Tiny did all of this. He influenced all of this. He's the reason why all of this exists, why all this happened. Truly just an agent of chaos, the agent of chaos. Which is why the final send off, we love it. Because in that moment, it's like Darren wins, he's going to become Lord of Shadows, eventually going to have to kill Vansha, eventually going to have to kill everyone pretty much, to the end of the world, basically. Then he decides to kill himself, and he has a great line where he says, "Destiny rejected." Destiny in the figurative sense, but then destiny as in Des Tiny. You love it. Because this whole time, for many books, many books, I don't remember when exactly they introduced the whole Lord of Shadows thing. I mean, not even Lord of Shadows, just like the whole word scars thing. Like it's either vampires or vampires, well, whatever. But for many books, we thought there's only 2 destinies. It's either vampires win or the Vampanese win, and then obviously to Darren specifically, either Darren wins, he becomes Lord of Shadows, Steve wins, he becomes Lord of Shadows. So for him to kill Steve, and then for him to cause Steve to kill him, is like, well now what? Now neither of those destinies can come true because both of the main pieces in each respective destiny doesn't exist anymore, is eliminated. Um, I love that. It's so spiteful in the best and most justified way, because now Destiny, Des Tiny, who orchestrated all of this, as we've just explained, purely just because he loves chaos, he loves death, he loves destruction, entropy to its most extreme sense, doesn't get what he wanted. All of this planning too. Not even just the satisfaction of seeing these things happen, but all of the decades, I'm sure, decades and decades of planning that he had to, all the little pieces he had to nudge in just the right direction, gone. It can still be salvaged, but we'll get to that in a moment. You love it, like it hits because obviously we have the past 11 books, right? We have the moment where it's the final showdown, right? We have, Ganon and Vansha and them there and Tiny and whatever, right? The Cirque back there, they're dealing with it. Debbie, RV, Alice, right? And everyone, right? Everyone's here. We had the Annie and Darius stuff previously, so everything is coming together, and then we have the moment with the final showdown, Steve and Darren. Darren kills Steve, and you're like, thank God. We don't like that Darren won because, he becomes Lord of Shadows, but out of the two possibilities, that's what we want the most, right? I'd say more likely than not, if you're reading these books, you would rather have Darren kill Steve and unfortunately become the Lord of Shadows than Steve kill Darren and become Lord of Shadows, right? So that happens, so somewhat bittersweet, but for the most part, we're like, thank God Steve is dead. And then they hit you with all the Mr. Tiny stuff, right? And it's like, oh no, that sucks. And then we get right back up to where we were, even higher than we were before, for Darren to stick it to Tiny, something that he could have never seen coming. It really is a roller coaster of emotions, and it's great. It's so gratifying because he beats Steve and he beats Tiny within like 5 minutes of each other. So it's awesome, one thing about that whole thing too, that I like that Darren pointed out is when he was trying to get Steve to kill him, it seemed like Steve for a moment, everything kind of faded away. Where for a moment, maybe Steve finally realized that this was wrong. Revenge was wrong because, the whole Mr. Tiny thing I think killed him because Mr. Tiny was like, you're my son, but you're not my son. Darren's my son. He's the winner. I don't love you. I think that finally fully just broke Steve. Not breaking him in a way of now he's insane because he was already broken that way. Broken through that, like broken through the insanity to just a numbness and to just a defeat and to him being reflective of his entire life of just like, this is all for nothing. This was all pointless, So for a moment, it's like, man, out of all the times that I want you to be vengeful and I want you to take my life, Steve, please, you're not going to do it. And then he has to coax him. He's like, yeah, I plotted with Crepsley. You're a loser. And Steve was like, what? And then, stabbed him like 6 times. But I do like that too, because I think at the end of the day, Steve is still probably my most hated character that we've seen so far in in best books ever. Like I said, I've kind of tried to retread some other ones that we've done so far, but I still think Steve is the worst. I can't say that he was a victim of circumstance. I don't want to give him that because he just went so far with it. You know, if he was the antagonist and he was fighting with Vampanese and he thought he was right, that's fine. But I think him going so far with the revenge, so far with the delusion that he thinks that Darren and Crapsley plotted against him, betrayed him, and then obviously doing horrible, horrible things to, to regular people, but also people that are associated with Darren, just because they're associated with Darren, just because he knows that that will get to Darren. Not only get to Darren, but trying to get Darren to flip and become as evil as him, because he also knows about the Lord of Shadows thing, about how one of them will become the Lord of Shadows. So he wants to prove to Darren that you are not better than me. You and me are the same. You will do anything, just like I will do anything. I want you to kill Darius after I kill Chankis, because that will prove that you're evil just like me, and that will prove me right. And the fact that I know that you plotted against me with Crapsley all them years ago, it will give him validation for his entire life. And so that is why I don't think I can be like, I feel bad for Steve. He was just part of the destiny, and he did what he had to do. No, I don't think it's there. But I do like that moment that does break him, because, as we know, and we'll get to the end in a few moments, there is another universe in which, Steve is still his very rambunctious and very passionate self, but he doesn't become full-blooded evil. You know. Um, so great moment. Darren sticking it to Tiny. Uh, Jump ahead a little bit. Now it's Ivana's turn to stick it to Tiny. She's having twins, and this is something that I sort of remembered. Like I think I said last week, there were certain things about the ending that I remembered, and we're kind of coming up on them. Like the very ending is sort of what I remember. Ivana having twins, that part I don't remember. I thought she was just having one kid. Her having two kids makes way more sense. Each kid is a third vampire, a third Vampanese, and a third human. So she's gonna have both of them. Probably give one to the vampire side, one side to one kid to the Vampanese side. It's like, hey, both of y'all have a kid. That's a third everything. That means they can have children with everything. We're gonna have one clan. We're gonna unite all three species into one clan. We're gonna unite Earth. you know, so smart, so clever. Will it work? We don't know. Obviously, that has yet to be seen, and we won't see it because I don't think there's any books past these. I mean, I know there's none. I just mean, there's no like little short stories or novellas or anything that show any more of this, this universe. So we're just speculating. Like we hope it works, but I do like that Ivana is doing her piece. Um, she finally has kids, and this is how she does it, to stick it to Tiny and make it so that the destruction like that doesn't happen. Just the destruction of everything. So very, very, very smart there. Um, yeah. And then we have post, kind of like the epilogue type stuff here, getting right to the end. Darren, as a little person, stops Darren from the past from seeing Steve get rejected by Crepsley. So that was the big plan. That was how to take Darren out of the equation in this new reality, I suppose. We know that he will just be replaced by somebody else, but we can at least let young Darren not have to go through all of it. We can let present, I guess, Darren move to paradise, all that stuff. So for Darren, on both accounts, it works out for him. He already had to go through all this. So we're not going to make him do it. We're going to kind of erase that. So that's cool, because that will stop Darren from stealing the spider. It'll stop him being a vampire. And then it'll also stop him from being suspicious of Steve, because he wasn't there. He didn't see what happened. He has no idea what Steve thought. That was a big thing, is that he got distanced from Steve because he was like, Steve wants to become a vampire. What the heck? And then also, vampire said he was evil. So that's two things against him, right? And then hopefully that will also stop Steve from becoming the Lord of Shadows, because him getting called evil by Krebsley, I think, hurts, and I think he will not forget that. But I think what really pushed him over the edge into this crazy path was Darren. And it's not Darren's fault. We know this, but it was Darren because from Steve's perspective, um, Krebsley calls him evil. He knows that Darren was there, and Darren, at least a little bit, must believe Krebsley because why would he distance? Why would my best friend start acting weird around me and like stop talking to me and all this stuff because someone called me evil? Like, if my best friend didn't believe I was evil, then he would immediately reject the notion of just some random dude calling me evil, right? Like, he'd be like, that was weird, right? But he must believe it a little bit because he's distancing himself from me. So now that gets in my head, and then he becomes a vampire and all that stuff. Now it's like, oh, you guys planned this, so cutting that out will hopefully cut out Steve going down that path again. I still think Steve will remember the evil thing, but I think that him losing Darren is what made him be like, well, I have nothing to lose now, so now I'm just gonna become a vampire hunter and all this stuff. But him being able to keep Darren on his side, I think will hopefully stop him from joining the Vampanese and all that stuff. So and then Darren gave Mr. Tall his diary. Very smart by Ivana. He has the diary showing his whole life. Mr. Tall will give it to future Darren around the time that he dies, I guess. And then hopefully future Darren will publish it because Ivana kept dropping the hints that Tiny does not look at literature. He has no interest in reading or fiction or anything like that. So it'll get published and hopefully people will know. People will see it. Especially people who are in the know will see it and they'll see what happened and see how evil he is and some knowledge being veiled as a fiction story. So hopefully that will prevent a lot of future stuff from happening. Him going back as a little person helped himself, past self, not going to this stuff, but also present stuff, going to paradise. But the diary will hopefully help many, many, many other people. Will hopefully change some courses of the future. Just another way to stick it to Tiny and hopefully derail his plans. And then Darren dies. That's the end. His atoms sort of separate and he floats into paradise. Very good. Very good book. Very good series. I think all the way through it was fun. I don't think there was a single book that was like unnecessary. I think there was a lot of good action, a lot of good emotion, good characters, right? There was a few times where, it got me kind of choking up a little bit, like especially these parts with like Annie, I'm talking to Annie, obviously, Krebsley dying, right? Even some of the trial stuff, our sales, Hardcat learning weed, there's so many great moments, and it ending like it did, which is funny because my memory of the ending was way more Tiny winning. Like my memory of how it ended was that, oh, Tiny is the one who had the idea of sending him back just to be like, none of this matters. I did all of this just for my own amusement, which he did, but it's not how it ended. It was more so Tiny and Ivana striking a deal, Ivana getting the best of the deal, him tricking Tiny, and Tiny eventually is going to realize that all these dominoes have been set up and they're falling against him, so that's really fun. It's interesting, with the idea of like this stuff is still going to happen now, but with different people most likely, and with Ivana is going to have these kids. So that should wrap up a lot of stuff. Him seeing Krebsley again at the very end, that was interesting. Him wanting to say hi to him and probably just burst into tears of seeing him again. But it's like, man, what a Krebsley would be so proud of him. If he, and again, we don't know what Paradise is. We don't know if from Paradise you can see stuff and that's living or whatever. But if Krebsley could see him, I think he'd be very proud of everything that Darren did. Um, some things maybe not, almost killing Darius, probably not, but I'm sure he would have understood, like him seeing the context. He understands why he felt that way. But like everything, especially the very end, him killing Steve and then killing himself to stop Tiny, and then you know everything. Um, I mean, there are some sad things, right? Like, I mean, I guess he could. No, maybe not. Because I was thinking that, like, man, it's sad that he's never gonna be able to. Well, I mean, him going to the Cirque, like, him not being able to have his friends at the Cirque kind of sucks, right? Um, him not being able to be with Debbie kind of sucks, right? Because I was thinking, like, oh, maybe he could, but it's like he meets Debbie like years after he was blooded, and they were around the same age at that point, right? So like now, I mean, you figure Debbie. I guess as you get older, age means less. Like a 12-year old, or like I don't know, like like a 13-year old being with a 6-year old, crazy, right? But if you're 37 and you get with a 30-year old, not crazy. So I guess maybe he could wait until it's less crazy and also legal and acceptable. Um, but also maybe not. Maybe. Well, well, also no, because Darren would have no memory of Debbie. When is the book supposed to be published? When he dies. After he dies. After the time that he would die. So he would wait. So would it be like after he was supposed to die to like fake his death? Is that when they're gonna give it to him? Or is it gonna be like an adult Darren? To like the age that Darren is now, quote unquote. So like 10, 15 years from now. Interesting. Yeah, he wouldn't even know Debbie, so it doesn't even make any sense. But yeah, it is unfortunate. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else. I mean, yeah, because the events will go the same, but with the Ivana's children in the book can be altered pretty much. Yeah, I mean, the series is crazy. A lot of stuff. I do like the nice little sort of kind of fourth wall breaking that they have, where at the end he's like, oh, and then they can publish it as fiction and it could change the names, and it's clearly Darren Shan, the author, right? Um, so I like that. I think that was fun. Um, but yeah, that's it. I had a lot of fun with this series, reading it again. A lot of good stuff there. Let me know what you thought of this book as well as the series as a whole. There are other things with this, coming off of this series. I think there's two things I wanted to note. One, there is a prequel series that was released after this, and I believe it is about Mr. Krebsley. I think it's like 3 books, 4 books, something like that. I've never read it, so maybe at some point we'll get back to that and I'll read that for the first time on here, maybe, and learn about Krebsley's older leg. And I know nothing about it other than I believe it's called like the Saga of Larton Krebsley, and I think there's at least a few, but there's not 12. I think there's like 3 or 4 books. And again, I'm pretty sure it's a prequel. I mean, I guess it has to be, right? But I don't know like where they're going. Like, if I had to guess, I would say probably the most interesting thing would be him maybe becoming a general, like that sort of time in his life. But I have no idea. I don't think I've ever even read like the synopsis of the books. Like I don't know. And then also there is another Darren Shan, the author, series that I really, really enjoyed. Maybe even more than this one. It's called Demonada. That's the name of the series. And that one's really, really good too. Really, really fun. That one gets even like crazier in terms of like scope, I think. So I'm sure at some point I'll read that one on here as well. But what's next, right? End of a series is always exciting because we get to see the end of an entire story that we're invested in, but we also get to look to the future of something new. Um, so here it is. Next series we're doing isn't quite a series. It is a collection of books. We're going to be doing the Secret Projects by Brandon Sanderson. So, a little bit of explanation here. Brandon Sanderson, obviously the author of the first series I ever covered on here, Mistborn. If you didn't read that or listen to that, you should go do that, because Mistborn is a great series. We did Mistborn Era 1, so that's the first trilogy, and love that series. One of my favorite, if not my favorite series of all time, and that's Brandon Sanderson. Secret Projects is not a series, it's a collection of stories that he wrote that are in the Cosmere. Cosmere is his universe, so he writes a bunch of series, a bunch of books. So there's series and also standalone books that he writes, and they are all within what he calls the Cosmere, which is a shared universe. It's sort of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like the movies. How the movies are separate, but they're actually part of the same universe and they share characters. It's basically like that. So we're gonna return to the Cosmere, the Secret Projects. They are all standalones though, so you don't have to have read Mistborn. You don't have to have read anything pretty much to enjoy these books, because they are all standalone within the universe as of right now. Anyway, obviously, if you have read other stuff, you'll kind of get certain things that, like, I imagine there'll be some references here and there. Maybe some shared characters. I never read them, but they are standalone, so you don't have to read the other anything else. We're going to be covering 3 of them. There are currently 4 secret projects, but one of them is not part of the Cosmere, so we're going to not cover that one. Maybe sometime in the future we will, but yeah. So first one is Tress of the Emerald Sea. The next one is Yumi, the Nightmare Painter, I believe. And the third one is The Sunlit Man. The one we aren't covering is I believe it's like the Frugal Wizard's Handbook, something like that. That one's not Cosmere, so we won't be doing that one. But we're going to be the other one, the first one being Tress of the Emerald Sea. We're going to be doing, it's already broken up into 6 parts, I guess. So I figure we'll cover 2 parts a week, do 3 weeks. So we're going to do the first 2 parts, which I believe is, anyway, first 2 parts, part 1 and part 2 of that book. We're going to read it. I know nothing about it. Really, I don't know. I don't know if I even read the synopsis of this book, but I've never read it, and it's gonna be a good time. It's gonna be a good time. So we're gonna turn to Brandon Sanderson. Love him, and this will eke into, I think, a year of this podcast. I don't remember when exactly. I think it was about end of October last year when I started it. So I think it's kind of a nice thing to celebrate a year. We'll kind of return back to an author that started it all. So, I think that's it. Like I said, read Tress of the Emerald Sea, first 2 parts, part 1 and part 2. I'm going to go through that. I'm trying to think of anything else I should say. No, I think that's it. We have a good time. We're going to read some books. That's it. So, until next time, read those first couple parts. We're going to get into it. Going to have a good time, see what this book's all about. Again, like I said, just to read it for all these books. Reading it for the first time with y'all. So, I don't even have any future knowledge. It's not even possible for me to spoil anything. The same way I've had to hold my tongue previously. So, I'm going to read it for the first time with y'all. It's going to be a good experience for all of us. And can't wait.